Let's learn about the anatomy of the craniovertebral joints. First, we will focus on the anatomy of the Atlanto-Occipital joints. The learning objectives for this session will be: first, we'll try to understand what are craniovertebral joints, what are the two major craniovertebral joints we have. Then we will learn about the Atlanto-Occipital joint under the headings of any other joint like type, articular surfaces, ligaments, movements and the muscle responsible for these movements. What exactly are the craniovertebral joints? Remember, the craniovertebral joints is used to the articulation of the occipital bone with the atlas and then the articulation of the atlas with the axis. These are interconnected by series of membranes and ligaments. So put together, all of this is what we refer to as the craniovertebral joints. Even though atlas lies between the occipital bone and the axis, even the axis is also connected to the occipital bone, forming it as a component part of the craniovertebral joint, right? So the joints formed between the occipital bone, atlas and the axis are collectively known as craniovertebral joint. In this session, we will focus on the anatomy of the Atlanto-Occipital joint, that is the joint between the occipital bone and the atlas or the first cervical vertebra. What exactly is the type of this joint? Atlanto-Occipital joint is a synovial joint of ellipsoid variety. In simple, it is an ellipsoid joint. What about the articular surfaces? The superior articular surface is formed by the occipital condyles, the inferior surface of the occipital condyles, and the inferior articular facets, as we can see, is formed by the superior articular facets found on the lateral mass of the atlas. This is in simple regarding the articular surfaces. When we talk about the ligaments, the first ligament is the capsular ligament, which loosely encircles the articular surfaces. Apart from this, two important ligaments that we have for the Atlanto-Occipital joint are the anterior Atlanto-Occipital membrane and the posterior Atlanto-Occipital membrane. As the name suggests, the anterior Atlanto-Occipital membrane will connect the anterior arch of the atlas to the anterior margin of foramen magnum. The posterior Atlanto-Occipital membrane will connect the posterior arch of the atlas to the posterior margin of foramen magnum. This completes the ligaments of the Atlanto-Occipital joint. What are the movements that occur at this joint and what are the muscles responsible for it? The Atlanto-Occipital joints are also called as joints of yes. The reason for this is these joints bring about the flexion and the extension of the head, right? Now, the joint at which this nodding movement of the head occurs or the movements of yes occurs is the Atlanto-Occipital joint. What muscles bring about these movements? The flexion of the head or the neck is brought about by the rectus capitis anterior muscle, the longus capitis muscle and the bilateral contraction of the sternocleidomastoid muscles. This brings about flexion of the neck. Extension of the neck is the opposite action, which is produced by the rectus capitis posterior, obliquus capitis superior, semispinalis capitis, splenius capitis and the uppermost fibers of trapezius. All these muscles act together, bringing about extension of the neck.